Welcome to this webinar. I'm really delighted to be here and to have been asked to support your charity in terms of delivering this training. So just very quickly to introduce myself, and also I'll talk a little bit more about Contact in a minute. So my name's Sharon. Um, I have worked for Contact now for 10 years on a freelance basis, delivering support for parent carer forums, but for the last 4 years, delivering training as well for families with a whole range of different disabilities and special needs for their children. I myself am a parent carer. I have a daughter who is now 19. She has Down syndrome, and I also have an older, I was going to say child, he's not really anymore, he's 22 next week. So I have two offspring. Um, so I've got a lot of sort of experience of the SEN system. I've been involved in my local parent carer forum, which was at the time of the SEN reforms coming in 10 years ago. And also I have a range of different experience for different organisations. So I'm really delighted to be here. And I hope that I will be able to deliver some really interesting content for you. And then at the end, there will be a question and answer session. And hopefully, again, I'll be able to answer any questions you have. So what to expect from this presentation? Obviously, it's an online presentation that's being recorded. We ask, as Sam has just said, if you can be prepared, have a quiet room, put yourself on mute, have pen and paper ready to take notes. Just to say, this obviously is being recorded, so you can watch it back at your own leisure. We've got a lot of slides to get through in the time allocated, so I'm not going to be reading every single slide word for word. But obviously, the fact it's recorded means that you can go back to the slides that you want to see and read the content. I believe that you will also receive a copy of a PDF copy of the slides as well. And there will be some links that we refer to during the session. And again, some of those links will be sent to you as well. So all of you will be kept on mute, but at the Q&A session at the very end, then obviously please come off mute, we can have a chat. And I believe that bit of the session won't be shared on the recording afterwards. It will just be the presentation part. So we'd ask in the Q&A that I'm sure you all do this, you all respect one another, and that there's no inappropriate language or comments. This is just our standard contact slide. I'm sure all of you will be perfectly lovely to one another. Obviously, if during the session you have any issues, you have any questions, then Sam and Zoe are here and they will keep an eye on the chat function. Either through the chat or at the end, there's no such thing as a silly question. So please do ask any questions that you have as we go along. And as I've said at the end, there should be, or I will be allowing time for Q&A as well. So just very quickly, I'm sure you're all really familiar with Zoom. And in fact, today I had an updated Zoom, which means that mine no longer looks like this anymore. I've got a whole new different range of buttons and things, but hopefully it will be something like this for you. So there's a little speaker button where you can mute and unmute. And there's a video camera button where you can have your camera on or off. As Sam just said, if you are not comfortable with having your face on the recording, because we're recording this session, then feel free to turn your camera off. We really don't mind at all. Going further across, there's two little people, and that's where you can see who else is here. And then a speech bubble is where the chat function is. Again, as I say, I'm sure you're all really familiar with this. And then there is the leave or the leave meeting button or exit, as it now says on my screen, if you need to go. So very, very quickly, I said that I'm here on behalf of Contact. Just want to tell you a little bit about the charity. Contact has been going for many, many years. I'm not sure exactly how many, but when my daughter was born 19 years ago, Contact, or at the time they were known as Contact a Family, was one of the first charities that I actually got in touch with. And at the time, way back 19 years ago, they used to have a paper booklet of signposting and resources and that they would post out to you, but also they would put families in contact with each other as well. So I have a daughter who has Down syndrome. They would put me in touch with other people who have children who have Down syndrome. And that's still very much part of the ethos of Contact. Very much believe in supporting families to become more empowered, and also to work together and to help each other, pretty much as you're able to do in your parent groups with this charity. So if you don't know Contact, please do go and have a look at the Contact website. There is a huge amount of information that is available on there, including about a whole range of different topics such as education, behaviour, finances. There's a benefits check tool, there's a grant finder tool, there's information about things such as sleep, preparation for adulthood for disabled children, just pretty much anything that you want to find out about on the website, you will be able to find out. And I've already sold the website to you, but also just to say on there we have information about a whole range of workshops, a listening ear service, which is a free service where you can just book a 1-hour call and speak to somebody if you're just needing to offload, sort of to have some emotional support. But the one thing that I really want to point out here is we have a helpline. And on the helpline, pretty much you can use it whenever you want to, but particularly if you've got benefits queries and finance queries or education queries, we have specific teams that are expert in both of those areas who can give you really personal, individualised support. So please do have a look at the website. And we're on a whole range of different social media communities as well. You will receive all of these links, so I'm not going to go through all of those. So in terms of why we're here today and what this session is about, then basically what I'm focusing on is supporting your child or your young person and their transition back to school. So, as I say, I'm absolutely delighted to have been asked to support the development of this training session, and also to be here with you this evening too. So in terms of what we're going to look at, this isn't everything, but it just gives you a flavour for what's going to be coming up. I'm going to start by talking a little bit around some of the legislative framework and the guidance for supporting schools for pupils who have medical conditions. And I think it's a really important starting point to understand what expectations and duties you should, well, basically what expectations you should have and what duties schools have to meet your child's needs when they're in school and they have medical conditions that need supporting. So we'll be looking at what to expect and also what not to expect. So what should schools not be asking you as parents to be doing? Thinking about working together collaboratively with the setting, so whether that's a school or a college, to plan your child or young person's return. How can you involve your child or your young person? And again, that will depend on their age as to how much you think is suitable for them to be involved. But how can you involve them in that planning? What are maybe some of the adaptations or the supports that you can request? One of the things that we talked about when we were planning this session was the fact that we don't always know what things are classed as reasonable or acceptable, or what things maybe you can ask for your child. So just going to give some ideas there. And then talking about how can we support your child, and how to manage any anxiety or worries that they have, and just again give you some ideas there. And then looking at your well-being and support as well as a parent carer during this time that could be quite stressful, or you might feel quite anxious. And also just thinking about siblings at the end as well, as I say, before a Q&A. So this link will be sent out to you, but it's really important, a set of guidance that it's worth you becoming familiar with. So on the 1st of September 2014, a new duty came into force, so 10 years ago, basically for governing bodies in a school, so your school governors, to make arrangements to support pupils at school with medical conditions. It's also important for you to know that some children who have medical conditions might also be considered to be disabled under the definition set out under the Equality Act 2010. And if that is the case, then governing bodies must also comply with their duties under that Act too. So there's a whole range of duties come with the Equality Act 2010. And in addition to that, some children, young people, might also have special educational needs that require them to either receive SEN support, so support in the mainstream classroom, or maybe their needs actually will require them to have an education, health and care plan. Now, in the session today, within the slides that I'm going to be presenting, I'm not going to be talking specifically about SEN support or EHCPs, but I do have some slides that we can come back to in the Q&A session if that's where any of you have got questions in relation to that. And that is something I'm really happy to talk to you about and provide some support with. So the key document for you to be aware of is the one that's linked here, which is the Supporting Pupils at School with Medical Conditions document. And some of the next few slides will be talking about the content that's within that document, but obviously only a summary. So that document, which I've just referred to, sets out the expectations for schools. So this is, as I've said, the responsibility of the school governing body to put this in place. But obviously they're likely to require, they're going to ask the head teacher and the school leadership team to actually do it. But the ultimate responsibility sits with the governors. So they are required to put arrangements in place to support pupils who have medical conditions. And as part of that, they need to ensure that your child or your young person can access and enjoy the same opportunities at school as any other child. So it shouldn't be that your child is excluded from a whole range of different activities. They have duties to adapt things and make sure that children can all be included. And again, that's the same under the Equality Act as well, that there should be adaptations and reasonable adjustments. So the way that this should be done is looking at the individual needs of an individual child and working really closely with you as their parent carers to understand what impact is that medical condition going to have on their return to school or when they're in school, and what needs to be put in place to support them during that time. So they need to demonstrate basically how they're going to support your child's learning, but also around their well-being too, their emotional well-being. So that's a really important part of this guidance, that the guidance isn't just saying it's about catching up on lessons and making sure that your child hasn't missed out academically, but actually it is about making sure that your child feels confident and is supported as well in terms of their well-being. So they need to consider those social and emotional implications that either are associated with the medical condition itself or that are associated with any worries or concerns about coming back into the school setting. And schools also have a duty that if other services need to be involved, the school should make sure that they are involved as required. So every school should have, all state-funded schools that is, should have a published policy on pupils with medical needs. So when I say state-funded schools, that would be schools that are local authority maintained. So the schools that local authorities are responsible for, or also academies as well. So whether your school is an academy or part of a multi-academy trust, they are still state-funded schools. The only exception to this would be independent fee-paying schools if you're paying for your child to go to one of those schools. So all state-funded schools should have a published policy on how they're going to support pupils who have medical needs. And this policy, as well as being published, should be reviewed regularly, and it should be easily available to both you and also to the school staff as well. Now, these are some of the things that should be included in that policy. So there should be a named member of staff in the school who has got the ultimate responsibility for implementing that policy. Now, depending again on the size of the school or the college, will determine who it is. It may well be a head teacher, it could be the special educational needs coordinator, or it could be a senior leadership team member. They need to include in the policy what arrangements they have for ensuring that all staff in the school are aware of children's medical conditions. So where it says all staff, it doesn't just mean teaching staff or the staff that are going to necessarily regularly come into contact with your child, but also maybe those that are working in school reception or the lunchtime staff that are only come in for sort of 1.5, 2 hours a day, for instance. The policy needs to talk about staff training and the responsibility for that, what procedures they will follow if they're notified that a child has got a medical need, how they manage medicines in the school, and I've got another slide on that shortly, so I'll come on to that and give you a bit more detail. How they monitor individual healthcare plans. Again, I've got another slide on that shortly, and I will come and talk about what they are. And also what arrangements they have for things such as school trips that might need risk assessments doing for them. So it's really important as one of your first starting points is to find that school policy, because it will give you a clear idea, hopefully, of how the school will be able to help and support you and your child on their return to school. So one of the things that is really, really important through this whole process is to get some ongoing communication in place. So ideally, you'll have a key person who will be your main contact so that you know that there is always somebody that you can speak to, even if really short notice, to either reassure you or if something changes and you need to make any adjustments to the plans and the provision for your child. So early on, you want to be establishing what does that communication channel look like? What are your preferences? Do you want the school to telephone you? Do you want them to email you? Do you want them to talk to you at the end of a school day, for instance? Maybe all of those things for different, for depending on what the communication is about. But it's important to work out with the school how you're going to work together. So contact the school as early as possible to discuss your child's return. So as soon as you know that you're thinking about planning your child's return, even if it's not going to be immediate, it is worth talking to them and saying, well, this is when we anticipate they'll be coming back. Let's start working together to reach that date. Obviously direct them to the Aplastic Anemia Trust for further information and resources, because obviously they're the experts and are going to be able to give some really useful help, support and guidance. So when you first meet with the school, or if you have a telephone call, I know schools often now will do Teams calls and Zoom calls rather than always face to face, but when you first meet them, whatever format that is, the most important thing is obviously that you talk about your child's medical condition, how it has impacted them. So what are their individual support needs? What are their concerns about going back to school? And what are your concerns? And also maybe what are some of the adaptations that you are hoping that the school will be able to put in place? So this is your opportunity. Now, obviously, as you start those conversations and as the schools start to think of things and you start to think of things, then there will be adaptations to your plans. This is not your only opportunity to talk to them. You don't have to tell them everything at this point. You don't have to get absolutely everything set out in writing following this meeting. It is the start of a process, and it's an ongoing process until your child has fully returned and is settled back in school or college. So what you're doing is the start of putting together this reintegration plan. And that needs to include how are you going to monitor how well your child is adjusting and how they're feeling about being back at school, and also from the school's perspective, how things are going as well. So it's important as part of this very, very early communication that you identify a person in school who will be your primary contact, but also to start to think about having a person in school who will be your child's primary contact as well. And that might not be the same person, because it may well be that it's somebody that your child has already got a really good relationship with. It might be their form tutor. It could be somebody who has sort of pastoral responsibilities, sort of a mentor type role. But it's worth getting that in place and thinking about who are going to be the key people working with you and your family as you're planning this return. So I've already said there's lots and lots of resources available for the school. These are just two examples of the guides, and these are the first one on the left is for early year settings and primary schools, and the one on the right hand side is a guide for secondary schools, colleges and universities. So there's lots of resources available to support you and to support the school. So please do refer the school on to the Aplastic Anemia Trust so that they can access those resources. So if you're having your first meeting, then it's really worthwhile. These are just some tips about how you can get the most out of a meeting. It's worth you agreeing an agenda in advance. Now, schools don't always do this. I know this from my daughter having additional needs. That sometimes they'll just say, "Oh yes, please just come in for the meeting." But I think that sometimes it's really important for you to have a clear idea about exactly what are you going to be talking about in the meeting, what order are you going to be talking about things, and if they don't provide an agenda, you can either ask them for an agenda for the meeting, or you can suggest an agenda, and you could say, these are the 4 things that we want to talk about in the meeting that's taking place next week. And between you, hopefully then you can decide what the agenda is. It's important that you know who else is attending the meeting and what their role is. So why are they there? And that you can invite the people you think will be helpful to be in that meeting as well. Now, again, this is what I've talked about at the beginning. It's really important you have those really open and relationships that are built on trust, so that if you're asking for somebody to come along to the meeting, that the school understand why, and likewise that you understand if the school have invited somebody along to that meeting as well, so that there's a whole culture of transparency and working together and collaboration during this period of time. So it's definitely worth you making a list of the things you want to talk about or that your child wants to talk about, if your child is coming to the meeting. And actually that also is another point. Is your child going to be at the meeting or not? You may have some meetings where they're there and you may have some meetings where they're not. And again, this might be determined by how old your child is, or how worried they are about returning to school. And only you will know what's going to be best for your child in those circumstances. So make a list of the things that you and your child want to talk about. Collate if you've got any records, any reports, any letters, anything at all that you're wanting to share at the meeting. So bring them all along. And one of the things that I often do just as a strategy when I'm going to the meetings is I've got lots of little sort of post-it notes and things in my drawers and highlighters, so that I can make sure before I go that I know exactly the page that I want to refer to, or the section will be highlighted so that I can read something out in the meeting. So really spend some time preparing for that meeting. Think about the things you need the school to know, but also think about the questions that you have. And we've got some example questions later on in this session as well, things that you might want to just ask the school about. I've already said ask your child what they want to be shared at the meeting and also if they want to attend. And then consider as well if you want to take somebody else with you for support, particularly if you're feeling particularly anxious, or you're worried about it, you think it's going to be quite an emotional meeting, you might just want to take a friend with you just for moral support. So during the meeting, again, this is just really good practice for attending meetings about a child with your child's school. So when I'm talking about this, I'm talking about meetings that are slightly longer than maybe the ones you've had in the past, which are parents' evenings. You have 5 minutes with a teacher. These are ones that maybe will last an hour or longer, and talking about your child and talking about sort of numerous different aspects of supporting your child back into the setting. So at the beginning, it's important that everybody introduces themselves and that you understand what everybody's role and responsibility is when they're attending. Sometimes we see we go into meetings and there might be 3 or 4 people from the school, but you don't necessarily always know who they are, what their responsibilities are, or why in particular they've come to that meeting. So if you're not clear, if you don't know, don't be afraid to ask and just say, could you explain to me what your role is? How are you involved in supporting my child? So that everybody's clear on who's in the room and why. You should ask for notes or minutes to be taken and to be shared after the meeting. Of course, you can take your own notes as well. If you want to record the meeting, then don't do it secretly. Just ask and say, is it okay if I record the meeting on my phone just so that I can listen back to it later? If that's something that you would find helpful for yourself or for your child. If there's anything you don't understand, ask for an explanation. Um, this is your opportunity when you're in those meetings to really sort of unpick how the school are going to support your child and what are the strategies they're going to put in place and basically how are they going to be there and be communicative with you. So what is it going to look like when your child is back in school? So as I've said, it's an opportunity for you to share your concerns, what you think your child might struggle with when they're returning to school. And again, you're the expert on that. And you and your child are going to know those things way more than the school. It's firstly unlikely that the school will have had a child with the same condition. Um, but secondly, even if they have, then all children are different and will need different support and will deal with things in different ways. So it's important in these meetings that you're able to communicate what is important for your child. There may well be support or approaches that you've found to help your child in the past, particularly if they've been worried about something, anxious about something. There may be strategies that you've used and developed at home already, or while they were in hospital, for instance. So again, share those, share your knowledge. This is your opportunity to do that. It's important to understand as well what you can be doing at home to help their transition back into school. And we've got some ideas later on in this presentation. At the end of the meeting, it's really important that you know what are the next steps, what's going to happen now. If people have agreed to do things, then it's important to have that recorded and that you know who's going to do what and when are they going to do it by. And then agree a date. When are you going to meet next? Or when are you going to talk next? Or what's going to happen next? And who are you going to be able to speak to going forward? So how are you going to keep this process going and who are you going to be able to talk to? If you've got any concerns, or if on the way home you think about something that you didn't think about in the meeting and you think, I just want to drop them an email or pick up the phone, so that you know who you can talk to and how to get hold of them quickly. So these are just some questions or things for you to think about. I'm not going to run through all of these because you're going to get a copy of the slides. But really, this is an opportunity for you to be asking those questions about, well, who in the school needs to understand about my child's condition? There is this sort of balance that you're going to need as to obviously your child's privacy. They're not going to want everybody in the school to know all of their personal details, but also you need to have enough people in the school know how to support your child with whatever needs they have when they're returning to school. Thinking about whether your child needs an individual healthcare plan. So that's not the same as an education health and care plan, which is for SEN or special educational needs. This is about having a plan in place that actually sets out in detail. And as I said, I'll come on and talk about that. Things such as, is there a safe space for your child to go to if they don't feel well? Or what will happen in an emergency? Who do you need to let know if your child can't come into school or if they've got a hospital appointment? So there's lots of different questions here that you might want to be asking when you're in that meeting. And we've got some more questions. There's a bit of a brain dump here with lots of different things. So how are they going to support your child's well-being as well as catching up on lessons? How are they going to support your child's peers and friendships? How are they going to make sure that if there have been big changes in the school since your child was last there, that they help your child understand what those changes are and how to navigate those changes? And what services or expertise can the school access? So there's again a whole range of different questions here that you can ask, but you will get a copy of these questions after the session. So I've mentioned this a couple of times, an individual health care plan. Now, as I said, although the name is quite similar, an individual health care plan is not the same as an education, health and care plan. They're very, very similar. So an education, health and care plan is for children who have special educational needs that can't be met from the resources that are usually available in a mainstream school. So as I mentioned at the beginning, my daughter has Down syndrome. She has an education, health and care plan that makes sure that she gets the right support in the classroom, that she has access to speech therapy, that she has access to travel training and all of those sorts of things. Now, an individual health and care plan is specifically for children or young people who have got medical needs. So it's a formal document that will set out details of your child's medical condition and any support that they need and any emergency procedures or other strategies that need to be followed within that school or college setting. So it could include things such as medication and who would administer it. It might be emergency procedures, as I've already said. It might be things such as risk assessments for going on school trips or taking part in certain activities. And also, we've already talked about this confidentiality. Who needs to know what? So it may well set out that certain members of staff in the school need to know ABC, but there are other members of staff who only need to know XYZ. So it's really important to have this document in place that has been co-produced with you, which means that you and your child have had an active role in pulling that plan together. It's not something just for the school to go away and write it and then present it to you. It's something that you should be heavily involved in actually drawing the plan up. Now, there is no standard national format for these plans. So you may have one of these for your child and it might look very different to somebody else who you know through the parent support group here, for instance. They might have a completely different looking individual health and care plan, but they should all have similar contents in them. So schools can draw up their own, but obviously they need to be setting out this type of content within them, so that you have a plan of action basically. And it should be reviewed with you at least once a year. And again, that would depend on how much your child's medical condition is changing, as to how frequently it needs to be updated and reviewed with you. So there's a lot of text on this slide. I do apologise for that. And now, again, this has all come from documents about supporting medical conditions in school. And we will make sure you have the links for this too. Now, schools can give children prescribed medicines as long as they are in date, obviously, labelled and provided in an original container as dispensed by a pharmacist or a chemist, with clear instructions about how they should be stored, how they should be administered, so how often and how much. So I'll give you just an example, as I say, from my daughter. She needed to have some paracetamol in college. She is not reliable enough to be able to have it herself in her bag, because she would sometimes forget how much she's taken. She can't necessarily read the instructions to how many doses she should take, or know how long in between, because of her learning disability. So we had to get prescribed paracetamol from the doctor that the school or the college would hold, and then they could administer it when she needed it. I couldn't just go to Boots and buy a box of paracetamol or a bottle of Calpol. It had to be prescribed. It had to have the proper label on it with all of the dosage. And that's basically what will be the same for your child as well. Now, schools have to keep a written record of any medicines that they administer to children. So how much was administered, when was it administered, and who administered it. They should hold the medication in a non-portable container, so a cupboard, probably a locked cupboard somewhere in the school, probably a medical room, and they should keep it in that space. It's not something that should be carried around the school, say with an individual teacher. Now, any staff that are expected to administer medication should have received training. And again, this depends on the type of medication as to what sort of training is required. So depending on what type of medication your child might have, or whether there's any particular equipment or anything like that, the staff will need to have received appropriate training to be able to administer that for your child. If you are in agreement, and your child is a young person, and you feel that they are absolutely fine to carry and administer their own medication, then that can be part of your individual healthcare plan. And you would just need to have that agreement in writing, probably with the school or college. Now, this second to last point here is really important. You should never feel that you have to go into school to administer medication yourself. As part of the school's responsibilities, they should ensure that there are school staff who are trained to administer medication for children who have medical conditions. And that's part of the conversations you need to be having with the child's school if your child is going to be needing medication while they're in the school setting. Now, the last point is also really important. If your child refuses to take their medication, the school can't force them. They can't hold them down and make them take medication. And they should inform you. They should let you know immediately that your child has refused that medication for whatever reason. As I say, there is a lot of information about prescription medications and what schools should and shouldn't be doing available to you, and we'll make sure that you get some links for that. Now, these are some other things that are considered to be unacceptable practices. And we know that some schools do ask some parents to do some of these things, but they shouldn't. They shouldn't be asking you to do any of these. Now, the guidance that was in the very first slide lists these as being unacceptable practices. So, for instance, asking you to come in to give medicine, ignoring your wishes and your views, So they should be taking into account your views, your child's views, and your medical professional's views. They shouldn't send children home unnecessarily. So they have to have a very good reason to send your child home from during the school day. So they can't just phone you and say you need to pick up your child unless there really is a very good reason for them to do that. And they shouldn't be penalising pupils who are absent for medical reasons. There's a lot of focus at the moment from the government about improving attendance rates in schools, and lots of schools are putting all sorts of incentives and motivations to improve attendance, such as saying, children who aren't here 95% of the time can't go to the prom, or they don't get to go on that trip, or whatever it is. They can't do that if there's a medical reason for that low attendance rate. So this set of guidance will be really helpful to you if you find yourself, hopefully you won't, but if you find yourself in that sort of situation. And they shouldn't be stopping children from taking whatever breaks they need, whether it's for eating, toilet breaks, rests, or whatever. And they should make sure that there are not barriers in place to stop your child from being able to take part in all aspects of school life. I've already mentioned this, but it just feels really important for us to be saying it's really important that you and your child are fully involved in all steps of planning your child's transition back to school, because you are absolutely the experts in your child's medical condition, but also what they're going to need to be returning to that setting. Now, sometimes children can find that really hard to articulate their thoughts, but there are a number of tools that are available to help them do this. I'm going to share a couple of things later on that might be useful for you to speak to your child about. Now, again, it depends on how old your child is as to how much they're going to be able to articulate their thoughts. It's also really important that, as I've said, the wider school community, so school office staff or teaching assistants, know what they need to know. So not absolutely everything, as I've said, but they need to know what they need to know to be able to support your child as well. So it's important for you to put some time aside to talk to your child about what returning to school will be like, or what they think it will be like, or what they're worried about. And while you're doing this, it's important that you're using clear and factual language and asking them open questions. It's important to find time without other distractions. So you don't want to be, I don't know, sitting watching television while you're doing it necessarily, or on your phone, or driving. Although what I would say is sometimes actually driving is the time when some children and young people, if they're in the back of the car, they actually talk more. So that might be the strategy for your child. So it's important to understand what their worries are, what their concerns are, and don't jump straight into problem solving. So really be there to listen and to try and understand. You don't have to immediately offer solutions to them. And it's important that they understand that however they're feeling is okay and it's normal, and that there will be other people who will have felt the same as they feeling, and that there's no one right way to feel either. It's not that there is a particular way you should be feeling, meaning that the feelings they have should be discounted. Whatever they're feeling is what they're feeling, and that's okay. It's also okay for you to say that you don't have the answers, but maybe you'll go and help them and work with them to find out those answers. And that can be sometimes quite hard because you're wanting to obviously help, give answers, reassure, but sometimes the most reassuring thing is to say, I don't know that either, or, let's work on this together, let's go and find that out together. And this doesn't have to be a one-off conversation. This is something that you should return to and you should be thinking about with your child on a regular basis through the transition as they're going back to school. Oh, excuse me. And some children might find it easier to draw or to write about their worries and their concerns as well. So it may well be that actually sitting and talking to you is really hard and they don't feel that they can do that, but they might be able to draw or write and put some notes down about what their worries are. So these are some of the questions that you could ask your child. Things that you don't want to assume that they're necessarily worried. They might not be worried at all about going back to school. But you might want to just be wanting to prepare them and saying, well, let's think about what's your school day going to look like now. How's that going to be with your friends? How are you going to manage this scenario? Or if you're sensing that they're feeling worried, you could be asking them about that and saying, well, what are your worries? What are your concerns? Let me hear what you've got to say. What can I do to help? What can the school do to help? What will be helpful for you as you go back to school or college? This is a useful tool. You can download this from the website NDTI, which is the National Development Team for Inclusion. They have a whole range of tools on their website that are there. They're mainly there actually for children who have special educational needs and disabilities, or children, young people who've got sort of anxiety or mental health challenges. And this is just one example. There's another one called What Matters Island, which my daughter has used, which is just a really beautiful graphic design of an island with palm trees and different aspects on it. And you can just use these as tools to think through some of the things and to basically help your child or to help you focus on the things that are going to be important as they transition back to school. So this is an example which is the important to, important for. And these basically important to, this is the things that are important to your child. So what's important to your child? Well, probably things around their self-esteem, things about having good friends. It might be important to them that they get to enjoy the lesson, go to their favourite lessons when they're returning to school. What's important for them might be things around staying safe. It might be that they need to catch up on maths and English. That might be really important for them. They might not think it's important to them, but and what we need to see on this is a balance. We need to see a balance of things. What we don't want is just things that are in the important for column, because they're the things that, they're not necessarily much fun. The important two things are important as well. So this is just, as I say, it's one tool that you can use to just brainstorm with your child, or you can do this and you can sit and think through some of those things. And it just helps you get the balance between thinking about what matters to your child as they're returning to school, and also what does good support look like for them, and making sure that we have a balance of both. As I've said, the NDTI, if you just Google NDTI, you'll find their website, and they've got a whole range of different tools on there that you can use. You can download and print them off and then use them with your child. Another excuse me, another example of something you could do is called a one-page profile. Now, a one-page profile is, you can design these in all sorts of different ways. And if you Google one-page profiles, you'll see all sorts of different examples. There are ones that are Lego designs, or for young children, they've got things such as Mr. Tumblr or different cartoon characters, Frozen, whatever. Or there are ones that are more formal, like the one on the right-hand side here. But basically, it's one page that captures all of the important information about a person. Excuse me one second. So it could be what people like and appreciate about me, what makes me happy, but also how can you support me? So it can be something your child, your young person can make with support, or if they're old enough, they can be making those on their own as well. And that could be something that's useful for them to be sharing with staff in the setting who aren't the ones who are working with them on a regular basis. So these are some of the things that your child might face as challenges when they're going back that are specifically related to their medical condition. So it could be that they find the demands of the school day are just too much for them, at least initially. It could be that they're concerned about changes in their own appearance. Their cognition might be affected, so in terms of their ability to learn, their ability to retain information, their ability to retain instructions. Um, it could be that whereas previously they would be able to remember if a teacher asked them to a sentence with 3 things in it, but now they might only be able to remember 2 of those things, and that can cause anxiety. What am I meant to be doing? It could be things such as hand-eye coordination, challenges with problem solving, concentration, attention, um, fatigue, feeling tired. Again, because the demands of the school day can put a lot on a child. Anxiety or worry, and it could end up in some behaviours such as attention-seeking behaviours or withdrawal, because it's easier to withdraw from people than to have to respond to questions, for example. So in terms of some of the adaptations, now, as I've said, this is an ongoing process. So it may well be that at the beginning, before your child has returned, you think, well, these are the adaptations they're going to need. And you might put 3, 4, 5 of these in place. But actually, it might be different things they need when they're back in school and they're actually in that setting. And you think, well, that actually is really helpful, but it would also be helpful if we could have these as well. So these adaptations don't have to all be agreed in advance. They are ones that, as I've said, having that ongoing communication, you can come back to the school and say, can you put this in place for my child now? It's going to really help them. So again, these are just some examples of things. This is not an exhaustive list. These are not the only things that you can agree with the school, but it could be things such as partial attendance. It could be leaving lessons earlier so that they can take slightly longer to walk to the next classroom. Again, that's particularly if they're in a large secondary school, then that could be something that you want to put in place to allow them to be able to walk between lessons in a calm way where they're not going to feel that they're being pushed around, because I know what those corridors are like and the stairwells in those big schools when the bell goes and everybody's rushing in and out. So it could be leave lessons a few minutes earlier. It could be extra time to do homework or modified homework. So it could be that the teacher said, well, this is the class's homework, but this is the homework we'd like you to do. Or instead of giving you a week to do it, we'll give you 2 weeks to do it. Whatever's going to be helpful, really. It could be that there's a quiet rest area put aside, there's additional pastoral support put in place, or a whole range of different tools such as cue cards, visual timetables, checklists, worksheets, whatever's going to help your child be able to engage in that lesson in a way that is meaningful for them and is going to reduce some of the burden on them so that they don't have to remember as much or they don't have to write as much. So there's a whole range of things that can be put in place for your child. So in terms of thinking about helping your child prepare so that they can go back to school or college, you might want to give them a few prepared lines that they can practice to say why they've been off school. It is likely that someone is going to ask them, why have you not been here? You've not been here for 6 months, for instance, or however long it is. What's happened to you? And children and young people don't always necessarily know how to respond to some of those questions. So giving them some lines, practicing them at home in advance so that they know how to respond can be really helpful. And then these are just some other strategies that might help your child, such as getting back into a routine, having home visits from a teacher or a friend. It could be just joining in 1 or 2 lessons to start with. For younger children, you might want to think about how are you going to say goodbye on the first day, have an agreement about what you're going to do, what's that going to look like. Or you could have what's called a cuddle button. This could be something like on both your hands, you have a heart drawn on or something, and then you can say to your child, if you're feeling sad, press the heart, and please know that that means I'm giving you a hug. You know, if you press that heart, know that I'm thinking about you. And or it could be that you want to put some little notes in their lunch boxes or whatever's going to help and reassure them during the day, depending, as I say, on how old they are. This is just some of the information that you might want to give to your child. Um, Again, to help, what you're wanting to do is reduce some of the uncertainty. So the way to prevent worries and anxiety is to try and reduce as much uncertainty as you can. So tell them what's going to happen, what timetable, what lessons are they going to go to, what adaptations should they be expecting, what will happen in lunch breaks. What do they do if they start to feel unwell or if they start to feel worried about something? Who do they speak to? So give your child as much information as you think is going to be suitable and appropriate to them. And again, depending on how old they are, this could be something that you do together in terms of collating that information. Now, I came across this, and we'll give you the link to this. It's a document that is not related to aplastic anemia at all. Is actually a document I found about returning to school post-COVID. So this was for children that were worried about returning to school, and it was about giving them something to help basically support them and support their return into that setting. So I just found these questions were really useful. So it's giving them the information that, as I've said, it will reduce some of the uncertainty. For example, things that might have changed in the school. I remember when my daughter, between my son being in year 2 and my daughter being in year 2, the year 2 classrooms changed from one building to another. You know, in terms of schools do this sort of thing. So what's changed in the school since your child was there last? What's the same? What rules do they need to follow in school to stay safe in terms of their medical condition? How can others help them in the school to stay healthy? And who can they ask for support? So having something written down can be really helpful. But I particularly liked, particularly for the older children, the problem solving worksheet where they can say, well, this is something I'm worried about. And then you say, well, what are the possible solutions for this? Let's list all the things that we could do. Which are the best? What are the pros and the cons? And then for them to choose and practice their solution. So I just thought these were two really nice templates, and it might be something that you could utilize something similar to this for your child. And I'm going to return to this booklet later on because there's some more pages from it that were really useful as well, or I thought they were. So when your child is back at school, it's really important, obviously, and I'm sure you will do this, to keep in touch with the key contact just to see how things are going. Agree how often you're going to talk, how often are you going to get feedback. And when your child first goes back, that might be daily. It may be that every single day they will give you an update on how things are. Maybe later on, maybe it's weekly. Depends on what your needs are at that point. It's important not to ask your child questions as soon as you pick them up from school or as soon as they walk through the door. I do this all the time with my daughter, and she will always say to me, I don't know, I can't remember. But then later on in the evening, on her own terms and in her own time, she will come and tell me what she's been doing at college. And I think sometimes our children need to transition back into that different space and calm themselves back down and relax and just basically decompress from a day in a setting that maybe at times was quite stressful for them. So find a quiet time, not when they've just got back, and to just see how things are going, what's working, what's not working, what concerns. But if they don't want to talk, don't pressurize them in talking to you, and just let them know that you are there for them and that you are obviously willing to help. These are just some of the strategies that can help if your child is experiencing fatigue. And schools will be used to providing these for lots of different children. So, as I've said, leaving lessons early, it could be timeout cards, and so they've got a safe space that they can go to if they're just feeling everything's overwhelming or they're too tired. They just show a card to somebody without making a big deal, and they can just leave the room. It could be that the school thinks about the timetable for your child and make sure that any more physical or energetic activities are sort of paced out through the day. So there's again lots of things here about how to manage fatigue to support your child. Friendships might need supporting. Friendship groups are probably going to have changed during that time. We know that children can be friends with one person one day and then not the next, and then they're back friends again. So that, you know, friendship groups are dynamic, they're changing all the time. Your child might not be able to take part in the same physical activities anymore, or in the same way. As I've already mentioned, they might be worried about their appearance. And they might not want to have lots of questions. So some of these things can result in a child sort of withdrawing from friendship groups. But what you might be able to do is support them, to help them. Think up some conversation starters, you know, around latest TV shows or sports, and practice discussing some of those topics with them. And also practice ways to say, I don't want to talk about that. Can we talk about something else right now? If somebody comes and asks them a question that they feel is really personal and quite intrusive, just to be able to say, not right now, I don't want to talk about that. Let's talk about XYZ, or let's go over here, or let's go and chat to them, whatever it is. But having the confidence to be able to do that sometimes requires practice to be able to, you know, really be able to say those words. It may be helpful to meet up with friends before returning to school, but also lots of reassurance as well would be helpful. There is also booklets that are available from the charity, so the school can be supporting your child's peers too. And preparing the peers for your child returning is a really important part of what the school can be doing to make sure that there isn't lots of unwanted attention, that there's not lots of questions that are really intrusive. And it's important that you ask your child how much information about their condition do they want their friends to know about. They might not want them to know very much at all, whereas others might be really happy to talk about it, to, you know, maybe talk about it in their classroom situation, or even to have a whole like school assembly about the condition or whatever it is. And there are materials available from the Aplastic Anemia Trust to support this, but it's really important that you make sure it's something that your child is comfortable with, and that they're happy with it and can take part in it as well, if they want to. These again are just some other strategies to help with friendships. As I said, giving them some statements to say, such as, you know, I feel really sad when you ask me questions about X, Y, or Z, or I feel really worried when you do whatever it is, and encouraging them to say stop, just stop, or to walk away if things are really difficult or challenging, but also to be able to talk with you and their friends as well about solutions. How can we work together? I think, you know, if their peers are saying things that are upsetting, it's likely to be unintentional. They're not wanting necessarily to set out to upset your child, and hopefully this won't happen anyway, but it's just if your child is facing some of these challenges, these are some of the ways that you can address that. Nurture groups can be helpful if your child is feeling particularly isolated, or that they've got a lot of anxiety or concerns or worries. Lots of schools will offer nurture groups, which is a group where they will be with other young people or children and young people from the school, maybe 6 or 12, and they will just do some organised activities together that can really encourage and give space for children to talk about what's going on in their lives, and also to get some strategies in place for themselves as well. We've got some links about nurture groups, which we will make sure you get a copy of as well. Circle of friends is another option. It's another strategy. Lots of schools will use a circle of friends as an approach to support a child or a young person who is just facing challenges around friendships. And again, this is really about mobilizing their peers to think together about, well, how are we going to make sure that this one person's not left out anymore, and that we're all good friends, and that they're valuable in our classroom, and that they're part of, everybody belongs here. So there can be some really interesting strategies that can come out of a circle of friends. So that also might be something you want to look into. It's worth being aware of some of the emotional signs around if your child is starting to feel anxious. They might not tell you, particularly if they're young. These are just some of the things you might start to notice, such as they say they might have a sore stomach, and they might have a tight feeling in their chest, their sleeping might change, they might suddenly be seeking lots of extra reassurance, they could be defiant and angry, or they could be teary and scared and worrying. So there's lots of different ways that some of these more negative emotions might come out, and it's important that you stay alert to these. There's a really useful organisation called Young Minds. Again, if you Google Young Minds, they've got lots and lots of support and resources available to help children and young people who've got anxieties, who've got worries. So do have a look at their website as well. I said I was going to come back to this booklet. Again, this is the same one about preparing children to go back to school. These are just two other, well, a number of different sort of strategies here. The one on the left can be that, your child might just say, oh, I'm feeling it in my body. You can ask them to draw on a shape of a person, where it is they're feeling things. It might be that you have a feeling thermometer, like you can see there, where every day they come home from school and they can just tell you today was a green day, or actually today was an amber day. And then that can be the start of a conversation. Coping cards could be something else you might want to put in place, such as, when I feel scared, I can go and talk to Mrs. Whoever, or when I'm feeling worried about, whatever it is, that they've got these cards that they can quickly look at and know what to do and have some strategies in place. So these are just some, if they're feeling anxious, these are from Young Minds. These are examples from Young Minds. But as I say, they have got so many resources on their website. It's definitely worth having a look at. Arriving to school early, having a safe place to go to or a job to do, so they've got a really calm start to the day, or having a friend meet them at the school gate so they can walk in together. It could be, as I've already talked about, having written instructions so that they've got checklists so they know what to do, they've got visual timetables, or it could be that they've got a peer buddy or a mentor who's a friend they can talk to, who's going to regularly check in with them. Or it could be an exit card, like I've already mentioned, or a safe space to go to. There's lots and lots of different strategies that are available, and schools will be well versed in these. These are just, again, some things from Young Minds that can help in terms of managing worry. So there are a whole range of different breathing exercises and grounding exercises that will help just to calm people down, to lower the heart rate, and to give space to actually stop somebody getting into quite a sort of panicky state. Or there can be a whole range of creative activities that can either be done in school or at home, such as using a worry box to write down worries and put them into a box. Or I've already talked about the gingerbread person showing where the body's feeling. It could be using art techniques to draw things they're worried about or what they'd like their future to look like. and also finding ways to help people relax. It could be yoga or listening to your favourite music and dancing around the kitchen or whatever it is. But finding ways and strategies and techniques will be really important for you and your child. I just said important for you and your child, and that's absolutely the case, because you might also be feeling worried, you might also be feeling anxious about your child going back to school. And again, that is completely normal. And there is no right way for you to be feeling either. It's important that you don't just put things off, or say, well, actually, my focus is my child and I'm not going to worry about myself right now. Actually, it's worth you putting some strategies in place for yourself as well, so that you can manage your emotions, and that so you can get any support as well if you're worried, if you're feeling anxious too. So one of the things it's worth doing is thinking about, where do you get your help? Where do you get practical support? Where do you get emotional support? And again, there can be a whole range of different people or organisations that might be people that you would go to. It may be that you want to talk to a counsellor. It may be that you want to just talk to your best friend about something, or it could be other parents through this charity, through the sort of parent support group, who understand what you're going through. But it's really important that you think about how you're going to be supported, excuse me, through this period as well. Because sometimes as parents it can be really hard. We take everything on that our children are feeling, and sometimes we forget to look after ourselves. But we really do need to look after ourselves during this time as well. So in terms of self-care for you, we've got a whole range of links that we'll share with you. But it's important you've got your support network, but also that you find some time for yourself too. You've obviously been going through a very traumatic period while your child has not been well, and as they're going back to school, it does provide you with an opportunity to find some time for yourself, hopefully, and take a bit of a break. The NHS has got some really useful resources about mental well-being. They've got 5 steps to mental well-being. They've got information on mindfulness, how to stay healthy, exercising, all of those sorts of things. I'm not going to preach to all of you, but these are all the things that are helpful in terms of our coping strategies as parent carers too. And the last thing is to be thinking about siblings. So all of the things really that we've been talking about here so far in this session could equally apply to siblings. So for instance, they could be really worried about their sibling returning to school and might need some space to talk about it too. They might need their own support network. If they're in the same school as the child who's returning, or the same college, it may be that the teachers need to think about what support they put in place for them too. It could be that siblings' friends ask questions. Is it that siblings need to have some lines that they've rehearsed, or have rehearsed to say, do you know what, I don't want to talk about that with you. Can we just get back to doing whatever we were doing? So it's important to obviously plan all of this transition for your child and with your child, but also to think about yourself, your own well-being, and how you're going to cope through this period, but also any siblings as well. And on that note, and almost perfect timing, because I was trying to leave 15 minutes at the end for questions and answers, we come to the question and answer slide. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. I haven't been able to see any of you, by the way, while I've been presenting, so I'm hoping there are still people there and I'm not talking to myself. So I'm going to stop sharing, and then I'm just going to see if there's any questions, if there's anything that's come up in the chat. I don't know, Zoe and Sam, if there's anything there that you want me to talk to, but really keen to hear your thoughts.